Wow, check out the high school dropout that entered with such an idiotic expression. From here, I can sense it. And do dropouts also have children with goofy faces? How bothersome. I ran into Isabella, an old classmate, in a posh steakhouse with my son Brian. Since our school days, she, an exchange student from overseas, has always denigrated me. She was speaking and laughing in French with her foreign partner. It was evident from their behavior that they were disparaging us. Brian, my son, got up out of nowhere and said, "Miss, I understand everything you're saying." Isabella paled after deciphering everything and realizing who we were. My son Brian continued, "Listen, starting tomorrow, there won't be a place for you at the company." Yes, Isabella and her foreign lover were astonished to learn who I was and that my son Brian was. Robert is my name. I used to be a shy, reserved boy in school. I was a pain in my class during sporting events since I was so awkward in the game. That's the reason I was always made fun of in physical education classes. However, there was one activity I could fully commit to: studying. I cherished it as it didn't call for any athletic abilities and required no social interaction. As a result, I consistently scored highly academically in my class. However, my timidity made me a simple mark. My peers made fun of me and teased me a lot in elementary school. It persisted into middle school, this bullying. Isabella, the exchange student from Paris, was the most persistent among them with her mocking. "You're overly conceited just because you're marginally more intelligent. It's unsettling how introverted you are. Come sit with me. You should be sitting near the window in the cold." Isabella approached me during break time after the seat swap and insisted on moving to a new seat. She seemed to be unhappy with her seat, so she decided to pick on me in the hopes that I would be the most inclined to agree. I simply moved to where she asked, as I didn't mind sitting by the window or anywhere else. Isabella seemed miffed by my obedient demeanor, but she was gone in a flash when a friend called. Such a fuss over a simp. I was perceived by others as being easily pushed around. Others seemed to believe they could have their way with me, making irrational demands, though not to the same extent as Isabella. They would make up stupid songs about me, especially after tests when my name was listed among the highest scores, and I was made to switch cleaning responsibilities. They gave me a very unpleasant feeling. Nevertheless, I never thought I could prevail in a debate, so I just got by silently through middle school. I made the decision to keep my future ambitions a secret from my peers once I graduated. After high school, I promised to get a job, but instead I enrolled at a technical college in a far-off town. If you want to go to a technical college, that's fine with us. We support you. I wanted to avoid further interactions with my middle school classmates and sought a deeper learning experience not available in regular high schools. My parents readily agreed. My mom would say, "If you have something you want to do, do it." I'm really grateful to have parents who supported me like that. Going there, I realized how well the extensive and profound education at the technical college suited me, especially in programming. I even won an award in a programming competition. "Robert, you're amazing." I'm so surprised. The girl who approached me after I won the award was Emily. She was a very bright and cheerful girl in my class. She was popular, good at studies, and we quickly became friends. "You were bullied in middle school, Robert? You might be quiet, but you're smart, and I enjoy talking to you." Despite our opposite personalities, Emily saw my traits as part of my charm, and we soon became a couple. I was still not great at socializing, but Emily, with her bright, blooming smile, was someone I could open up to. We clicked well, both being academically smart. She liked me for who I was, and I liked her too. I thoroughly enjoyed my high school life, both in studies and youthfulness. After graduating from technical college, I continued my relationship with Emily while working at an 8 company, utilizing my programming skills. At this 8 company, all internal communication was done through non-face-to-face tools like chat, which was a comfortable environment for someone like me, who was not good at interacting with people. The work itself was busy but fulfilling. The years flew by since I started working. "Thank you for always being with me, Emily. If you're okay with it, will you marry me?" "Yes, I'd love to." "Thank you, Robert." When things settled down at work, I proposed to Emily, and she happily accepted. We got married. A few years after our marriage, we had a child, and at Emily's wish, we named him Brian. Brian loved drawing more than anything, more than singing or being held. Usually, Emily or I would prepare crayons and a notebook for him. But at some point, he learned to do it himself, even though he was still a toddler, and he would start drawing. These delightful days of watching Brian grow came to an abrupt end when a tragedy struck our family. Emily, who went to work on her day off, was struck and killed by a falling steel plate from a construction site. Why? Why did it have to be Emily? Dad, where did Mom go? She didn't leave us to go to heaven, did she? Brian, realizing his mother Emily was gone, was in disbelief. I held him tightly in my arms. Working on your day off? Yes, they asked her to come in on Sunday because they were short-staffed. Robert, if you're okay, could you take care of Brian? Emily had asked me about working on her day off a few days before. I didn't have work that day, so I agreed. I never imagined something like this would happen. If only I had stopped Emily for any reason. If only I had driven her to work, this might not have happened. I was filled with regret. Now, because I couldn't protect Emily, I had caused Brian to suffer too. Brian and I were engulfed in grief, but I couldn't stay away from work forever. I also started doing the unfamiliar household chores and parenting as a single parent. I've made dinner, so eat with Brian. Mom, thank you so much. It's nothing. I know it's tough, but you need to hang in there with Brian. Now I have to go to work too. Though my parents helped occasionally with housework and childcare, doing it alone was a Herculean task. I tried to finish chores when Brian was engrossed in drawing or asleep. After putting my beloved son to bed, I often lay exhausted on the floor, sprawled out, staring at the ceiling. In those moments, I'd find myself lost in thought, reminiscing about Emily. I realized how much I had taken Emily's kindness for granted, that she had always taken the lead in household and child care duties. Dad, we'll be late for daycare. Hurry up. Brian, like Emily, was responsible, and he would prompt me as I rushed in the mornings. After Emily's death, Brian initially cried a lot, but gradually he accepted reality, became stronger, and tried his best every day. I knew he must miss his mother, Emily, but without ever complaining. He was always there for me, an incredibly good kid. For Brian and for Emily in heaven, I resolved to stay strong. I balanced work, housework, and parenting. Every day was a whirlwind. I would often be the last parent to pick my son up from daycare. When I picked up Brian from daycare, he was always drawing until the very last minute. Mr. Thompson, is Brian always drawing like that? I asked. Mr. Thompson told me Brian was so absorbed in drawing that he preferred it over playing with friends. It reminded me of my own student days. I reminisced about the times when I was studious and loved studying. John's drawings are all wonderful. If you and Brian are okay with it, how about we submit his drawings to a contest one day? Mr. Thompson suggested entering Brian's drawings into a competition. Hey Brian, how about we enter your drawings into a contest? What's a drawing contest? Well, it's a place where people who can draw as well as you get to show their work to experts who know all about art. On the way home, I discussed this with Brian. His eyes lit up with excitement, and he immediately wanted to participate. So the next day, I told Mr. Thompson we would submit Brian's drawings. Later, Brian's drawing won the top prize. Knowing his talent, Brian and I were overjoyed. Brian, you're amazing. Who knew you had such talent? Great job. Brian looked at me, beaming with joy, as if he was celebrating his own achievement. I patted his head with all my love. Today, we'll treat ourselves to a nice meal. We started going out for meals whenever there was something to celebrate. Just like that, as if to fill the void left by Emily's absence, we continued to live our days positively. A few years later, Brian turned 9. Brian and I went to a fancy steakhouse to celebrate the special occasion. Then, to our surprise, seated behind us was Isabella, my former middle school classmate. She was with someone who seemed to be her foreign boyfriend. After a while, Isabella noticed me and started a conversation. Robert, is that your kid? You always had a gloomy aura. I recognized you right away. And you were a high school dropout, right? How can you walk around your hometown without feeling ashamed? Just like in our student days, she looked down on me, still believing I was a dropout, laughing mockingly. Then Isabella and her boyfriend sat down at their table. But strangely, they started speaking in French, glancing over at us, seemingly talking about us. It brought back memories of middle school. The atmosphere alone made it clear they were bad-mouthing us. I had only one concern: Brian. In fact, Brian understood French perfectly. Suddenly, Brian stood up and approached Isabella and her boyfriend. "Miss, I understand everything you're saying." "Oh, what's this kid talking about? There's no way a child can understand French." "No, you just said my dad was creepy in French, didn't you?" Hearing Isabella say such things again, I was appalled at how little she had changed since middle school. But she and her boyfriend became furious with Brian, accusing him of making things up. Brian then began to recount everything they had said. He mentioned how I was plain and lonely in middle school, had no friends, and was a burden to the class due to my lack of athletic skills. Even now, I hadn't changed a bit, still plain. They even said my kid looked plain and stupid, claiming my stupidity had affected my son. While I was left holding my head in dismay, Isabella and her boyfriend were still arguing with Brian, denying everything and calling it nonsense. Brian was known for being brilliant and talented, especially since he immersed himself in drawing as a way to fill the void left by his mother's absence. His artistic skills had improved dramatically. He'd been delivering artwork to a French art dealer since elementary school, thanks to his talent in drawing. In the process of dealing with this art dealer, he had also mastered French. On my side, skilled in Aita, I thought about leveling up my skills to enhance my son's language abilities. I left my job at the Aita company and started an online language school with Brian. Brian mainly taught French to children who wanted to learn. For student sessions with kids, we involved Mr. Thompson, as he got along better with them. For languages other than French, we hired other teachers. I was in charge of the core systems of the company, like the teacher-student matching system and schedule management. Seeing Isabella and her boyfriend, I suddenly remembered something. They were recently hired as employees at our language school. I was at an event at Brian's school the day of their interview and left the interview process to other staff, so I only received their resumes. I had hoped they had changed over the years, but unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Remember, from tomorrow, there won't be a place for you at the company. Isabella and her boyfriend turned pale. Even forgetting the steak on the griddle was burning. It was their own doing. According to Brian, Isabella and her boyfriend had also been speaking ill of students in French. As an executive, I had to address this issue. You, with such tasteless behavior, I hope you never show your faces to me and my father again, Brian said firmly to Isabella and her boyfriend before returning to our table with a smile. Come on, let's eat, Dad. We came here for this. His talent and even his smile seemed too radiant, making me wonder if he really was my son. He seemed too perfect, but watching him laugh innocently, I realized he still had the same carefree nature as any other child. With that, Isabella and her boyfriend, unable to bear the shame, left the restaurant in a hurry, leaving their meal behind. I apologized to Brian for the unpleasant experience. Brian winked at me and told me not to worry about it. He's such a thoughtful kid. I often feel he's too good for someone like me. Hey, Mr. Anderson. Brian and I then heard a voice calling us from the entrance of the restaurant. Turning around, it seemed that students from our language school had gathered. Mr. Anderson, you're here early. Have you started eating already? Wait, who's actually late here? I asked, laughing. Oh, sorry, it was us. Indeed, this wasn't a class, so I had told them to come around lunchtime. But they were surprisingly casual about time. But are you sure it's okay for us to join for such an expensive meal? The students looked at me anxiously. I had decided to treat the students as a thank you for their help, like referring other students to our language school. Hearing this, the students were delighted. Soon, all the students gathered, and we celebrated the 3rd anniversary of our language school. Later, Isabella and her boyfriend were fired from the language school. Their mockery of us was problematic, but the direct cause of their dismissal was talking about customers outside the company. Apparently, Isabella had spoken about customers out of spite towards us, hoping to make it look like we were the ones who said it. But there were witnesses, and her plan failed. It was just retribution coming back to her. Isabella always struggled with studying, wasn't good at being persistent, and had no talent other than French. With her personality, I heard she was having trouble finding another job, but I decided to leave her to her own devices. Her boyfriend, who was fired at the same time, influenced their situation, and soon they were drowning in debt. Then her boyfriend lashed out at her, blaming her for their predicament. Why did you start ridiculing Robert so much back then? Robert was always good at studies and at the top of his class in middle school. I had good grades in France, but when I returned to America for middle school, the difference in the education system made it hard for me to keep up. Trying to justify herself to her angry boyfriend, Isabella continued crying and speaking angrily. I was always near the bottom in tests. I thought I was capable, and that was frustrating. I hated him because he was good at studies. Because of her pride, she never talked about these feelings before, and Isabella ended up crying. Leaving the crying Isabella behind, her boyfriend, holding his head in his hands, apparently said, "All this over that," and eventually left the house they were living in together. Now jobless and alone, Isabella was left to lead a lonely life. A few days later, an unexpected incident occurred. "Mr. Anderson, please come here." A panicked student led me to the entrance of the language school, where Isabella was causing a commotion with other students. "What on earth is going on?" "Robert, it's all your fault." Isabella, having noticed me, rushed toward me. Clearly, her target was me. Seeing Isabella barge into our school without permission, not being a student or teacher, I glared at her with sharp eyes, feeling anger. "It's all your fault my life is a mess, just because you could study a bit, getting all high and mighty. I'll sue you for firing me unjustly. After all this time, you haven't changed at all, Isabella. Why did you have to hate me just because I had good grades? There are plenty of people smarter than me. If it's about being top, you'd have to hate them too. What do you know about me? You know nothing. You have no idea how much I've suffered. I don't know because you never once tried to bridge the gap between us, Isabella." Hearing that, Isabella seemed taken aback. She had always showered me with unpleasant words whenever she saw me, so it must have hit close to home. After all, that was the root cause. "Why did you have to hate me like that? I would have preferred you to say you were struggling and ask for help with your studies. If taking the upper hand over people is your life, you'll always be bound by your own pride. If you really want to be bound, be my guest. I've already called the police for trespassing." "What? Police? Don't move." Then, as if on cue, police officers, apparently called by Brian, stormed into the building and quickly apprehended Isabella. Shocked by the turn of events, I looked at Brian, who gave me a peace sign. Such a fearsome child. "Let go of me. I have business with this man." Even with the police there, Isabella, consumed by hatred, continued to struggle and was eventually escorted into a police car and taken away. "That was scary. Glad she didn't have any dangerous stuff on her," one of the students said. "She reminds me of that teacher, Mr. Smith, who was fired the other day. Maybe she's holding a grudge against Mr. Anderson. Well, she was leaking information, so it's only natural she was fired." Some students felt relieved, greatly relieved to be freed from their fear, thanks to Brian calling the police while I was talking to Isabella. Thankfully, no harm came to the students or Brian. The thought of what could have happened if they had been injured sent shivers down my spine. "Are you okay, Dad?" "You look pale." Concerned, Brian looked closely at my face. I quickly assured him I was fine and forced a smile. Between the incident at the steakhouse and now this, I owe a lot to Brian. As a father, I need to be more responsible. I put my hand on Brian's head and gently stroked it to reassure him. "I'm okay. Thank you, Brian. You really helped me out. Let's cancel the classes for today. Can you help me spread the word to everyone?" Of course. Inspired by Brian's bravery, together we informed the students about the cancellation of the day's classes. Years later, the company Brian and I built continued to grow steadily. I further enhanced our internal systems, automating most of the accounting to increase efficiency. This allowed us to raise the teachers' salaries and attract higher quality instructors. Brian continued to draw, becoming so renowned that he won awards in major competitions open to adults. Mr. Anderson, I'm a huge fan. Could I please have your autograph? As he became famous, the number of enthusiastic fans increased, and Brian was quickly surrounded by them. Overwhelmed by this, I noticed a few fans glancing at me. Is that plain-looking guy a staff member? He's too plain, totally out of place here next to Mr. Anderson. I was wearing a suit, trying to look presentable, but overhearing the whispers of Brian's fans made me feel uncomfortable. I wondered what about me was giving off such a plain vibe. Maybe it's just because I'm an unremarkable man. Then I remembered being targeted by Isabella in the past, proving it wasn't just a coincidence. Indeed, compared to Brian, who sparkles like an idol, I, with my unfashionable black-rimmed glasses, lacked any aura and was worlds apart from him. Or maybe it's just my face. As I stood there, shocked, Brian, who had overheard the comments, came over to me with a smile that seemed to have sound effects and addressed his fans. This man here is my father. He's the reason my artistic talent shines, so if you're a fan of mine, I'd appreciate it if you refrain from making such comments. With Brian's smile and statement, the fans' faces turned pale, and fearing the displeasure of the other fans, they quickly left the scene. Angering Brian's fans can be really scary, I thought. Well, those kids probably wouldn't have said that if they knew I was your father. Dad, you're too kind. Fans who behave like that at the scene are questionable. I was left speechless by Brian's firm opinion, marveling at his excellence. It seems today's kids are not only talented but also compassionate. He really does take after his mother, Emily. Reminiscing about Emily, I watched Brian being applauded by his fans with a fond smile. A few days later, on a tranquil spring day, Brian and I chose to visit Emily's grave together. While sharing recent achievements, we talked about how studying really makes a person bloom. Effort never betrays you. I remembered Emily was also very studious, and that's why, together with her, Brian wouldn't have been born. We all love studying in our family, don't we? It's moving to think that Mom and Dad's passion for learning brought me into this world. Weren't you ever lonely without Mom, Brian? I asked him, looking concerned. Brian had always been with me without any complaints, but he must have felt the absence of his mother. However, Brian shook his head with a smile. No, because Dad was always there with me. His smile and words almost brought tears to my eyes. Getting older makes one more prone to tears, it seems. You should be proud of yourself, Dad. I owe my success to you. I was so grateful to see how well Brian had grown up. It was all thanks to Emily watching over us from above. In front of Emily's grave, Brian and I joined hands, and I reported our lives to her. Then, as if Emily were responding, a gentle breeze blew between us. Cherry blossom petals, seemingly carried by the wind, appeared out of nowhere, fluttering in the air. One landed in the palm of my hand. It felt like a part of Emily's floral-like smile, so I gently stored the petal in my pocket. The presence of family seemed to have blossomed even a reserved person like me. It was then that I realized how much one's life can change through encounters with others. Following the example set by Brian and Emily, I learned to smile more. As I became more open, naturally, people started to gather around me, and I began to slowly bridge the gap with those I had previously found difficult. Though I had kept them at a distance because of my discomfort, I started to realize that talking with many people wasn't so bad after all. Seeing me become more cheerful, Brian seemed happy too, which made me feel joyful. I took out the cherry blossom petal I had picked up during our visit to Emily's grave. I treasured it like a bookmark hidden in a book, carrying it with me as a charm, as if it were Emily herself. Ever since I found it, I felt as if it had been giving me courage. Could it be Emily? Is this you? I thought, feeling somehow as if Emily's spirit was residing in it. Finding myself alone, I spoke aloud without thinking, even though I knew such a thing couldn't possibly be true. But I wished it were so. Keep watching over Brian and me, Emily, I said with a soft smile, and then carefully placed the petal back into my pocket.